Hey everybody, welcome to the Fight Network studios. Happy Thanksgiving to our friends in the United States. Robin and I have decided to put together a list of our top 5 favorite fights that we are thankful for. We're going to start with you. I wasn't surprised when I looked at your list and we saw Conor McGregor on that list.
Yeah, at number 5. And maybe another one as well. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 2 at number 5. Now, Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 1 was spectacular. And Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 2, we saw the changes that Conor made to be able to deal with the greatness of Nate Diaz. We also saw Diaz push and take damage and come back and win round 3 and win round 5. It was a spectacular fight. You got to see growth from McGregor and you got to see Diaz at his finest.
What I love about those two fights is just the combination of how important they were to the whole landscape of mixed martial arts. All eyeballs were on Conor McGregor and Nathan Diaz, and it elevated the status of the sport. And I talk about those two fights because my number 5 fight is actually 2 fights. It's Cruz Cyborg's performances as she comes into the UFC. Talked about for years and years and years. I believe that she should have been fighting in the UFC because she's an attraction. The girl has 17 wins, with 15 of them coming by knockout. She is tailor-made for the casual sports fan, because that's what she does. She goes out there and wrecks fights.
Yeah, and that is easy to enjoy, and she is a spectacular fighter. My 4th one is also a rematch, Bisping Hendo 2.
Yeah, awesome.
That was a pretty killer fight. Both Bisping Hendo 2, those 25 minutes, and Diaz and McGregor 2, those 25 minutes, you saw the real spectacular nature of what it takes to put in a full performance like that from both guys. Bisping won that fight. The 2 rounds that I felt Hendo won, he really beat Mike up, so you had to see his guts and his heart to be able to handle it. Man, there were a lot of killer fights this year.
Yeah, no, I love that fight as well because it was an important fight. I was rooting for Dan Henderson as much as I love Michael Bisping.
I'm telling Mike.
And hey, I'm sure he can understand, because Dan Henderson was one of these guys that helped set the foundation for mixed martial arts to grow into the sport that it is today.
And that was his final fight, too.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's why I really would have loved to have seen Dan Henderson, a Pride champion, a Strikeforce champion. Yes, he was a UFC tournament champion, but if he could become the UFC 185-pound champion, wouldn't that be awesome? I look at my number 4 fight. We were there in Ottawa to see Wonderboy and Rory MacDonald. Rory MacDonald, he just kept trying his best to find a way, but we saw the greatness of Stephen Thompson that night in our nation's cup.
Yes, we did. And not everybody got that fight. In the room, they didn't get it. I think more people on TV got it.
It was hot, though.
But yes, it was super hot in there. But it's also, that was an element. People understand that kind of fight a lot more right now, where you force somebody to chase you. You intercept them as they come in. You manipulate the gap between you and them. People have already really started to catch up, and fans understand how awesome those fights are. I was so pumped about that fight that night, and Chris Weidman was like, yeah, you would like a fight like this. But I think people really now do get those kind of fights.
You're number 3 on the list, Stipe and Alistair Overeem. I went into this fight believing that just Alistair Overeem had such a significant advantage when it came to what Stipe was going to bring to the table. He was going to do an MMA boxing match, so to speak, and that Alistair Overeem would have so many tricks. He would be able to read him, and that was such an eye-opening experience for me to see how good Stipe actually is, and I think the rest of the world now gets it, right?
Stipe is legit, man. He's moving like a much smaller guy, generates power. There's a real sort of inverse relationship between power and mobility often, and Stipe has kind of found the magic formula to bring those two things together. I did a breakdown leading into it. It was one of the ones I enjoyed the most, because as you look at Alistair Overeem, he knows the truths of fighting. There are a lot of untruths and lies and ideas that are spread as truths that are not, including the idea that if I'm facing you as a southpaw fighter, I must move to the right and I must keep my foot outside yours. That is not true at all. It's just something we say and something that people accept as truth. Overeem moves towards your power all the time. He does it intentionally, and he does it to freeze you and handcuff you, and because he understands what you give up by moving that way, and instead he does it intentionally. So Overeem is a brilliant fighter, and Stipe's athletic platform is so high, he kind of took advantage of that.
And that's why I thought that Overeem, because of that experience, that it would be an advantage in this fight. On my number 3, talking about Alistair Overeem, an old school fighter, Eddie Alvarez winning the UFC lightweight championship of the world, just to me is one of the best moments in all of mixed martial arts, because we here at Fight Network, we've essentially showcased his entire career. We saw him fighting in Bodog, and we saw him fighting for Dream, and then of course he went on to fight for Bellator, and we just wished eventually that he would make his way to the UFC and face the best in the world, because we thought he was the best in the world, and he had a chance to prove to everybody that he was the best 155-pound fighter on the planet.
Eddie Alvarez has been one of my most appreciated and beloved fighters in my career of being a fan, you know, and I was so thrilled to see that guy win the UFC title. And, you know, things change and fighting changes, and I will always, the Sap Alvarez scale will always be the Sap Alvarez scale, and we'll always appreciate Eddie Alvarez. I'm really glad he added the UFC belt to that collection of titles that he had. My number 2 was Cruz versus Dillashaw. You know, that was a fight we were pretty excited to see, and it really lived up to it. It was hard to score. I can't imagine, you know, I thought they did a great job at the side. These are regular folks, not super high level math and geometry and movement experts, and I think they got it right, but it was a fantastic fight. You know, Dominic Cruz is really hard to understand, even when you would study him. In fact, the more you know about him, the harder it becomes, because you start to anticipate things, and he's telling you lies. You are anticipate things that you believe are going to happen, or that he's doing, or you think you see it, but he's operating on many different levels. Dillashaw and Bang Ludwig, I look up to Dwayne Ludwig a lot. We're going to have him in studio when they're here in Toronto when UFC 206 takes place.
Cornering Matt Brown.
He'll be cornering Matt Brown. They got as close as anybody's got to the answer. We'll probably see this fight again, because I think TJ is going to go in and beat up Lineker.
And that's why I'm super excited, because of the first fight. They get to make some necessary adjustments and try to figure out, okay, what went wrong? How can we solve the puzzle, or can we solve the puzzle of Dominic Cruz? My number 2 fight on this list is CM Punk getting smoked by Mickey Gall. Like, I really wanted this to be my number 1 fight that I was thankful for. And no disrespect to CM Punk, because not at all, because I think it's admirable that he decided to go and train and get inside of a cage in front of all these people that are going to absolutely annihilate him on social media and public. So you have to admire somebody to be able to go out and put themselves in a position like that. But the arrogance and the ego that you think that this is something you should be doing at the highest level, instead of starting with an amateur background. And I understand, because of his personality, he gets to skip a bunch of steps, but you don't get to skip a bunch of steps.
Yeah, the intensity that happens in there is something you have to acclimatize yourself to. No amount of smokers, even in one of the best gyms in the world, and Duke Rufus's gym is one of the best, and Big E and that whole team there did the best they could.
Yeah, of course.
But this is a man in his late 30s with no combat sports experience. It's just, we said it going in. I was thrilled for him, because I know what it was like to dream of fighting, and I did it at the lowest level, and it was beautiful, and I hope he enjoyed it for what it was. But you can't do it any more than you could go play in the NBA or you could go play in the NFL. You can't. And I don't take pleasure in the guy's loss, but I hope he learned his lesson. And he's talking now, there's conversation, maybe he'll be in the UFC if they find some kind of stunt situation for him. But on some level, that disrespects, you know, the realities of fighting too. So he really shouldn't have been there, and he shouldn't be there anymore. But studying fighting and getting to enjoy it in the gym is a pretty special thing.
Number 1. What's your number 1?
Connor and Eddie. That was I was so pumped about it. I was pumped to see Eddie get to do it. But on some level, we knew that Connor had evolved past that. What we have built as the prototype of fighting, combining wrestling, boxing, and jiu-jitsu, and that he'd gone beyond that. And seeing him prove it was pretty special. As somebody who's obsessed with the ever-changing, ever-evolving organism that is free fighting, I loved seeing it. As somebody who worships Eddie Alvarez, I didn't as much, but it was a very special fight, a special moment, an important moment in fighting.
I love that fight so much, because I'm just such a huge Conor fan. I've been such a huge Eddie Alvarez fan for a long, long time, and you just have to admire the beauty. And really, it was the passing of the torch, so to speak, from one great to another great, and that's my number 1 fight. One of the greatest fighters of all time, Fedor Emelianenko and Fabio Maldonado. If you haven't seen this fight, it is a car wreck. How Fedor was able to survive round 1. It's like somebody getting hit in the head with a baseball bat and then somehow finding the wherewithal to win the next couple of fights. Just the things that Fedor has been capable of throughout his career. You talked about his timing, his toughness. He's just one of the most spectacular fighters ever.
I think our two number ones line up in a really interesting way. One is looking at the ever-changing growth of the technology of fighting, and the other one is looking at the heart and the guts and the ruggedness and the courage and all of those attributes that are part of fighting.
That's it for us. To our friends in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving.